Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Unsigned Manager Podcast, where I, Siji Kolawole, break down football's key topics and headlines. This week's episode is about the new Premier League Hall of Fame, and with that, let's get into it. So the Premier League a couple of months ago announced their new Hall of Fame, where they would be inducting players who have done extraordinary things in the league into a Hall of Fame so they can be celebrated and immortalised forever. I think it's a really interesting concept. I like the idea. It follows on from American sports like the NBA and the NFL to praise former stars of the game and keep their memory alive so that newer generations of fans can still go back and learn about these top players. Looking at the players that got inducted into the Hall of Fame this year, it seems like trophies are not a direct requirement, but the impact on the league is more important. Players nominated like Les Ferdinand, Robbie Fowler, Matt Letizia would be difficult cases to make this early if only trophies mattered. So I think it's more the impact that they had on the league gives more weight to their case than just what they won. The criteria that the Premier League released to analyse whether players should get into the Hall of Fame, I actually think is really interesting. Players have to have been retired for a year, so players inducted into the 2021 Hall of Fame have to have been retired by August of 2020, 1st of August 2020. Only Premier League performance counts, not any other competition that they played in during their Premier League career. So for someone like Steven Gerrard, Istanbul in 2005 or the FA Cup win in 2006 doesn't support his candidacy. It's only what they've done in the league. They also have another long list of standards which I really like. In the beginning I found tough, but I think it's nice. Players have to have a minimum of 250 games, which is equivalent to about 5.5 seasons. Or players need to have had 200 appearances for one club, have been selected to a Premier League Team of the Decade or 20-year anniversary team, won a Golden Boot or Golden Gloves, which is most clean sheets in a year, voted Premier League Player of the Season, won 3 Premier League titles, which is steep, or scored 100 goals or kept 100 clean sheets. So either 250 or any of those other criteria and a player is eligible for consideration. I think this criteria is tough, really tough, but I think that's the point. I think the idea is that you don't want anyone to be able to get in. You need to keep the best of the best, and to do that you'd have to make really strict rules. I think it's hard for defenders to get in with that, because only 4 times has a defender ever won Player of the Year. Almost no chance they'll win the Golden Boot. And clean sheets only count to goalkeepers, not to defenders. So really you're looking at defenders have to have played the amount of games or won 3 titles, which is kind of steep, kind of difficult. But then again, you don't want to just have anyone be able to get in. You need to be really hard. The thing I don't like that the Premier League has done is that this Hall of Fame is only online. It won't exist in the physical. There won't be any museum or any statues or busts, and I think they're not doing enough. The NBA and the NFL, their Hall of Fame, makes busts of the players. There's a museum. Everyone comes to the award ceremony every year, and I think the Premier League should do more like that. This is the biggest football league in the world. It's probably had the best level of players, maybe arguing with La Liga, but I don't know why you wouldn't make this as big a deal as possible. Why not have a big ceremony every year where players make it and they give speeches and they're immortalised in a museum? Why not do that? So far, the players inducted are Alan Shearer, obvious, Thierry Henry, Eric Cantona, Roy Keane, David Beckham, Dennis Bergkamp, Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard. So the Premier League inducts 8 players a year, so that's the 8 for this year. I think None of them are. I don't think any of them are wrong. I probably would have had Scholes maybe over Beckham for longevity, or Gary Neville over Dennis Bergkamp for longevity. I don't know, but this list right now is fine. It's logical. It makes sense. And what I want to do this podcast is add 8 current players to this Hall of Fame. So what I'm looking to do is add 8 players who are currently still playing, actively still playing somewhere. I don't care where they're playing, but they're still playing professionally. And whittle the list down based on their legacy, performances and impact on the Premier League to create the next class who I think should be inducted. I want to avoid projecting too much. I don't want to look into the future too much. So a younger player who's had good performances, I don't want to go, oh, if he carries on at this rate then he'll get in, because I can't guess that. So it'll probably be leaning towards older players who have already had the bulk of their Premier League career. Not that I won't have to project for them, but it just won't be as much. What they've done is more finite. That's the aim of this episode. So let's get started. So my aim is to take you through as much of my thinking as possible when I was trying to select the team. So, judging by the criteria the Premier League set, there are 89 currently playing football players who are eligible for Hall of Fame status if they were to retire today. If their careers ended today, 89 players would be eligible for the list. So we start with this 89 and we work our way down to 8. So to do that, I have to set my own criteria. The Premier League obviously would be fine to accept all these players as eligible, but I want to create the next class, or the class I think should be made. So with that, I had to set my own criteria on who I think is more eligible than others. When looking through this list, I really started to like the criteria, the Premier League criteria, much more. It's harsh and it's tight. There's players right now like Sadio Mane, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Aubameyang, Marcus Rashford, Paul Pogba, who all, as of current, would not get in. They don't fit the Premier League's criteria, which is crazy because they're some of the best players in the league right now. And I think that's the point. Again, you don't want to just have any good player or any top player be able to get in. It has to be the best of the best. For it to be legitimate and a serious thing that people take into consideration and players are striving to get in, like the Premier League should want, it has to be hard to get in. If anyone can get in, then what's the point? It's just another fans vote or another something simple that doesn't carry as much weight. So step 1 was finding the 89, and then step 2 for me was eliminating all the players under 25. I decided to do this because I just don't think it's fair to project that much into the future of what those players might do. So that got rid of Zinchenko, Phil Foden and Gabby Jesus. There's just so much of their career left, too much projection. I have no idea what's going to happen. And if I can limit as much projection as possible, that's what I'd want to do. So I got rid of those players. So now I'm looking at 25 and above for the list. Step 3 was trophies or accolades. Individual or team trophies that any of these players have won throughout their career. For me, this is a big difference maker. Through your 200 games or 250 games, did this player stand out as one of the best individual or support their team to win a trophy? At any point in time, were you one of the best football players playing in England? I know that the Premier League Hall of Fame only counts Premier League medals, so I'm sticking with that for team awards, but individual awards, I'm counting PFA Player of the Year, Football Writer Association Awards, Premier League Player of the Season, Top 10 finish in the Ballon d'Or, PFA Team of the Year, FIFA World Player of the Year, and then like the Premier League, Golden Boot, Golden Gloves, and I'm going to add Top Assister in that. Those awards there indicate to me that At some point in time, this player was one of the top players in the league or was contributing to one of the top sides in the league. I think that's the boundary level. I think that's like the base level we should be setting. So this criteria removed about a third of the players out of the list. And a lot of those were players who had played on lower level teams for multiple years. So players like Matthew Etherington, James McCarthy, James Ward-Prowse, Ryan Bertrand, those players who had been good servants to lower level teams in the league but hadn't had top level success or longevity or stood out individually. We got rid of those kind of players. So next step for me was impact on the league. Did their teams do anything for the league? Now this is a lot more subjective because impact would be defined by how I think that player imposed himself in the Premier League, but could I tell the story of the league without him? Was he on big teams but not a main contributor? Was he actively boosting the success for his club? When the team was going through their most successful phase, was he a main reason? This criteria was tough on players like Johnny Evans and Gail Clichy, who won titles but did their best work on teams that weren't top contenders. And although they stood out individually, Evans at Leicester, Clichy at Arsenal, they weren't one of the top players in the league. This criteria hurt me most with Ilkay Gundogan and Bernardo Silva, who literally might be my 1 and 2 favourite players to watch in the league. Gundogan is so technically gifted, so smart, makes the right decision every time he's on it. Bernardo Silva plays free, plays fun, can take the ball anywhere, doesn't give it away. He's a tidy dribbler, smart attacking passer, but I just don't think that they were top level contributors to those sides. I think I could take them out of those sides, replace them with players at their level or just a level below, and I think Manchester City would have been okay. And that doesn't mean that they didn't actively contribute. I don't want to insult any of the players I'm taking out right now. Like Silva and Gundogan both played on the 100-point and 98-point team. They were incredible. The 98-point team that had Bernardo Silva and David Silva as 2 number 8s and Gundogan floating in behind, and the 100-point team. They were amazing, but they weren't the standout fulcrums of those sides. They weren't the best of the best, which is what the Hall of Fame should be striving for. That's the players that should be getting in. Premier League impact also hurts players like Christian Eriksen, phenomenal player, one of the best, so consistent, top level creator in the league for a decade, but he just didn't win enough. The Tottenham teams he was on were exciting and promising, but they never did enough. They didn't impact the league enough. Christian Eriksen wasn't ever a force in the league to be reckoned with. He was a top level player, but you weren't terrified when you had Tottenham next. And I think if they had won the league like they should have when Leicester won, Eriksen probably makes it, but just didn't do enough. And speaking of Leicester, their Premier League win is arguably the most memorable and best title win in history, but some of the players in that team, like Morgan and Huth, who are eligible, overall Premier League careers are just not strong enough to be in an elite company like this, which again is tough. Wes Morgan spent 2/3 of his career playing in Championship and League One. Robert Huth is a much harder case, a 3-time Premier League winner, winning 2 in the Mourinho era at Chelsea, but he was a rotational player under those teams. And between that gap of winning with the Mourinho team and winning with the Leicester team, who spent half his career on middling Stoke and lower level Middlesbrough teams. And although they were the rock of a legendary team, a miracle winning team, they just don't belong in the Hall of Fame right now. Jordan Henderson, someone else I struggled with. I don't want to project as much as possible. I'm trying to avoid projecting the future. But when I think of Jordan Henderson, I think he deserves to be in. But really analysing it and looking at it, his resume is just not good enough. If I'm being honest, his resume is worse than someone like Gundogan and Bernardo Silva, 3-time Premier League winners, to Jordan Henderson's 1 time. And sentimentally he's in because he's exactly what I think of as a captain. He Mr. Consistent, constantly available. Other than this year, Liverpool been injury hit. He might not be the best player in the team, but the team really suffers when he's not there. I respect Jordan Henderson, but I don't think I can put you in if you've won one Premier League and come really close in two, but then not put players in like Bernardo Silva and Ilkay Gundogan who have won 3 Premier League teams and been on absolutely dominant sides throughout. Nemanja Matic is another one. Marshalled midfields for over 5 years. Strong, technical, had the complete blend of a midfielder. In my mind, I think Jose Mourinho midfielder. First, I think Frank Lampard. Next, I think Claude Makelele. Then I think Nemanja Matic. Big, 6'4", can move on the ball, good feet when he was in his prime, athletic, top level player. Just doesn't have enough of a resume to belong in this group. Really phenomenal player at his peak. A game I had to play with this list is, if I list the players who should be in the league no-brainer, and I list the other guy's name, does it sound right? If I say Lampard, Roy Keane, Thierry Henry, Alan Shearer, and then I say Nemanja Matic, does it sound right? Does it sound like he should be in that group? And for Matic, it just doesn't sound right. Matic, Henderson, Zabaleta all missed out. Phenomenal players, just impact on the league just wasn't enough. So by this stage, I got the list of 89 down to 23. So the list of 23 at this point: Ederson, Kasper Schmeichel, Pepe Reina, Joe Hart, David De Gea. That's the goalkeepers. Centre backs are Gary Cahill and Virgil van Dijk. Fullbacks: Cesar Azpilicueta, Branislav Ivanovic, Carl Walker. Midfield players are Fernandinho, N'Golo Kante, Kevin De Bruyne. Wingers are Riyad Mahrez, Mohamed Salah, Cristiano Ronaldo, Raheem Sterling and Eden Hazard. Strikers: Sergio Aguero, Harry Kane, Carlos Tevez and Jamie Vardy. That's the list of 23 I'm working with right now. So by this point, I'm struggling. This list of 23 for me is really strong. All have got extensive resumes, all have had big impact on the league. Can't really tell the story of the league without them. Top level players. But I've got to work this list down. 23's got to get down to 8. So next step was, do they hold any Premier League records or do they have any memorable moments? If they weren't in the league, would we have missed out on anything? So I worked through each of the players' resumes, looked at all their honours, achievements, and the weakest names were removed. But this is like choosing between your children. I can't really explain how difficult this was. The players who didn't make it past this stage are still top class. In some cases were world class or are still world class players, but their resume just didn't stand up to the others involved. And again, I got to say, I'm really glad that this was hard and I found it this difficult, because I think this is what the Hall of Fame really should be. An agonizing, painful decision on who makes it. Players inducted shouldn't just be the best of their time, best of their era, but they've got to stand out amongst all Premier League players, be generational talents, be able to walk into any era of the league and be a top level performer. So out of that list of 23, the players are eliminated. Number 1, Carlos Tevez. Hard worker, wonderful player. One of my favourites, but just not a top level Premier League striker. Riyad Mahrez, 3-time Premier League winner. One of the best players on the eye to watch. Premier League's answer to peak Iron Robin probably, but again, great in his era, but Riyad Mahrez probably couldn't step out into another era and be as good as he is now. Raheem Sterling, highly likely to make this list if his production maintains over the next few years as it's been over the last few. just not enough right now. He's another player that age really helps him. He's only 26. You can see Sterling by the time he's 30, having put up a few more years of production he is now, probably walks into the Hall of Fame. But as of right now, just not yet. Fernandinho, one of the hardest for me to cut. Probably top 2 in his position for a decade. Real leader of men. 4-time Premier League champion. The tactical foul in the reading of the game, the passing, just some of the reasons why he stayed in that City team for so long. Fernandinho has been in the league much longer than I thought he's been. His first season is the year that Yaya Toure scores 20 and with 9 assists that year. And the difference between that year and the year before is Manchester City's defensive midfield wasn't really great, and Javi Garcia and Fernando there, and they need someone really to clean up that space so that Silva and Yaya Toure can go and do what they want. You sign Fernandinho. Is it a coincidence Yaya Toure puts up his best season ever attacking numbers? Top level, just never individually recognised enough. Real close for this list, but Fernandinho doesn't make it. Similar, really similar with Cesar Azpilicueta. Amazing player, Mr. Consistent. So adaptable, so flexible. Can play as a centre-back, can play as a right centre back in a back three, can play as a right wing back, can do any job you want, play the whole season at left back. Won titles, an unsung player who played his part to maintain success for Chelsea, but just like Fernandinho, not really enough individual acclaim or top level moments put him in this category. If you were making an all-time Premier League list and you had to pick a right back, you'd probably get to a few players before Azpilicueta. Doesn't mean he's not a top level player, but he wouldn't be the number one guy you thought of, and that's the kind of people we're looking for this list. Another Chelsea right back, Branislav Ivanovic, great in his time, such a threat, delivery of crosses and from dead balls, because he was such a physical presence in the box. Corner comes in or wide free kick comes in, Ivanovic is a problem. If you hadn't seen him play, the way I would describe him is, imagine Serge Aurier's attacking ability if Aurier was twice as big and less rash defensively. That's probably Ivanovic. That's the kind of level player you're dealing with. Amazing, but just not quite close enough. Gary Cahill, 2-time Premier League winner, was on the best defence in the league twice, was the perfect partner for John Terry. He allowed John Terry to go and step out and ball play, because Cahill, not simple as in a bad way, but just did his job. Old school defender, probably could have played football in the 90s really. Covered, cleared his lines, good header, real good threat from attacking corners. Cahill put up a number of years where he was a good goal scorer. Probably just not a long enough peak to get into this list, but underrated defender from this era. One that really shocked me, someone I thought would definitely get in, David De Gea. Probably before Ederson and Alisson's arrival, De Gea is the best keeper in the league, bar none, not a discussion, would not argue it. Man United might have wasted his prime. Years when they had poor management and terrible defences in front of him. No offence, Chris Smalling and Phil Jones, but it was a joke back there. David De Gea is single-handedly keeping Manchester United in titles, or in title races, in top 4 races. He was a top-level player. I think his individual his seasons by himself, top level. For the team and the team success wasn't good enough. And I think if I've got other keepers in the list who are doing both, who have the individual awards and the team awards, I can't justify De Gea ahead of them. I feel like Man United have done him dirty, but the lack of team success, he's only got 1 Premier League title, just isn't good enough to have him there. Pepe Reina, another amazing individual goalkeeper who suffered for being on teams who didn't perform well enough in the Premier League. He has better individual accomplishments than De Gea. He's a 3-time Golden Gloves winner, 136 clean sheets. Just doesn't have enough Premier League success to be in this company. And last person to cut was Kasper Schmeichel. He's the last man of the Leicester title winning team. He made it further than Huth or Morgan because he spent more time contributing to a good Premier League team whereas Morgan's career was in lower divisions and Huth played on middling teams. Schmeichel was part of a phenomenal achievement, but only having one title isn't really good enough to have him in this list. He's probably, if you were to make a Premier League list of most out of nowhere surprises, everyone in that Leicester team would get in, but at a Hall of Fame level, I don't think Kasper Schmeichel's done enough. So at this point, the players I'm left with are Ederson, Joe Hart, Virgil van Dijk, Kyle Walker, N'Golo Kante, Kevin De Bruyne, Mohamed Salah, Cristiano Ronaldo, Eden Hazard, Sergio Aguero, Harry Kane and Jamie Vardy. 12 players left. So I want to go through their resumes just to show you the level of these players and how hard it is to pick. Sergio Aguero is a 5-time Premier League winner, top scoring overseas player of all time, 4th all-time Premier League goal scoring, 1 Golden Boot, most Premier League hat-tricks, over 100 goals, scored a goal to win the league, literally to win the league. Harry Kane, 2-time Golden Boot winner, 4-time PFA Team of the Year, definitely going to get in this year as well. Young Player of the Year, over 100 goals, most goals in the Premier League calendar in a calendar year, most goals in the North London derby. Jamie Vardy, one of the most, if not the best player on Leicester's Premier League winning team. Premier League Player of the Season, 1 Golden Boot, 2 PFA Team of the Years, over 100 goals. Probably the most iconic, either him or Ian Wright, but I think I'd probably go Vardy at this point. I've started late, been playing at lower levels, and now I'm one of the best players in the league. Also, most consecutive games scored in broke Van Nistelrooy's record. Mohamed Salah, 1 Premier League win, 1 PFA Player of the Year, FWA Player of the Year, 2 Golden Boots, maybe another 3rd this year, depends on the last game of the season. 1 Premier League Player of the Season, most goals in the season, broke that record. First player to outscore 3 teams in the season. Fastest Liverpool player to 50 Premier League goals. Cristiano Ronaldo, joke. 3-time Premier League winner, 1 Ballon d'Or, 1 FIFA World Player of the Year, 1 FIFA Pro World Player of the Year, UEFA Club Footballer of the Year, PFA Young Player of the Year, 2 PFA Players of the Year, 2 Premier League Player of the Seasons, 2 FWA Footballer of the Year awards, 4-time PFA Premier League Team of the Year, 1 Premier League Golden Boot, probably the best player to ever play in the league, absolute joke, there's no point. Eden Hazard, 2 Premier League titles for him, 1 FWA Player of the Year, 1 Premier League Player of the Season and PFA Player of the Year. Also won a Young Player of the Year award. He finished with the most assists in a season 1 year. 4-time PFA Team of the Year. N'Golo Kante, 2 Premier League wins. First player to go back-to-back with 2 different teams since Cantona in 92-93. 2 PFA Team of the Years. 1 PFA Player of the Year. 1 Premier League Player of the Season, 1 FWA Footballer of the Year, 1 FIFA Pro World 11. Kevin De Bruyne, 3 Premier League titles, 2 PFA Team of the Years, FIFA Pro World 11, 2 times he's got the most assists in a Premier League season, equalled the record for assists, equalled Henry's record, 1 PFA Player of the Season. Up next is Kyle Walker. Kyle Walker's got 3 Premier League titles, and 3 times he's been in the PFA Team of the Year. He's a 1-time Young Player of the Year. He's been on the best defence in the league 4 times throughout his career. Team that conceded the least goals in the season, Kyle Walker's been on that team 4 times. Up next, VVD, Virgil van Dijk. 1 Premier League title, 1 PFA Player of the Year, 2 PFA Team of the Years, 1 Premier League Player of the Season, 1 UEFA Men's Player of the Year, 2 FIFA Pro World 11s, finished 2nd in a Ballon d'Or. Joe Hart has 2 Premier League titles, 4 Premier League Golden Gloves, which is the most in history, 2 PFA Team of the Years, 127 clean sheets, which is 5 more than De Gea. So if you're thinking of how good De Gea has been over his recent couple years, Joe Hart's actual resume is better than De Gea's. And then last but not least is Ederson, 3 Premier League titles, 1 PFA Team of the Year, 2 Premier League Golden Gloves. That's the level of players who are in contention to get into this Hall of Fame. That's the level. Any of these players really could say they could get in. And that's 12 names that I need to cut down to 8. Any of these players are worthy of being added. I think at this point now I think there's a few first ballot no discussions, and then after that it's a bit harder. So I had 4 players that for me was absolute no-brainer. Cristiano Ronaldo, number 1. Don't really have to say too much. If you ever watch a Premier League game between 2006 and 2009, he was the best player in the league. He's probably the best player in the world. Dominated the Premier League by himself. Arguably the best ever player, or the best ever performance in the league. Probably either him or Henry, who's already in. Second no-brainer for me, Sergio Aguero. Even throughout his injuries, 4th highest goal scorer of all time. When Pep came in, adapted his game, changed from a fox in the box finisher to a presser who can also link and create with others. Maybe up until this last season, the 2020-2021 season, he was probably the best striker in the league other than this year. A fully fit Sergio Aguero is hell for everyone. Most hat-tricks in the Premier League, no-brainer. Other one for me, Jamie Vardy. Half of the reason that Vardy's going to get in is how ludicrous his story is. Lower league player who's been released from Sheffield United, fights his way to the Premier League, wins the Golden Boot, wins a Premier League in a miracle season, gets to 100 goals. I don't think anyone thought after Ian Wright we'd see this again, and Vardy arguably eclipsed it with more records. Vardy for me, no-brainer. Last no-brainer, Kevin De Bruyne. Could argue and say that he's the greatest creator to ever play in the league. You're probably looking at him, Bergkamp, Cantona, maybe Gerrard you'd throw in there as well, but equaled the highest number of assists in a season, dominated games, 3 Premier League titles, and all the individual awards. I think he's a no-brainer. I think those are my 4 definites. Under no circumstances can I be persuaded not to have them. So now I've got 4 more spots open. So the candidate for the last 4 spots are Harry Kane, Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk, N'Golo Kanté, Eden Hazard, Kyle Walker, Joe Hart, and Ederson. So out of that group of players, the first 2 I'm drawn to the most are Kanté and Hazard. Kanté, excluding the 1920 season where he was dealing with injuries, incredibly durable. Playing 1 Kanté is like playing 2 players or 2.5 other players. Dominated midfields by himself. Famously finished the year Leicester won the league, Kanté's putting up 8 or 9 tackles and interceptions a game. Wins the league with Leicester, and then moves to Chelsea, wins the league there next year. It maybe doesn't have the longevity of others on the list, but I think peak N'Golo Kanté is as good as any other player on the list. So I'd have Kanté, and I think I'd have Hazard as well. At his best, he was the best player in the league, probably. So electric. I think during his time at Chelsea probably played on Monday nights more than anyone else. For some reason, I just feel like Eden Hazard played every single game on a Monday night. Chelsea wouldn't be playing well, or they'd be playing against a good team that's putting up a good fight. Hazard might drift in and out, he might be fully engaged or not, but you give him the ball 1 opportunity and he's killed someone. He's created a crazy goal, he's put a mad dribble in that's played someone through, he's bent it into the top corner, he dragged, it felt like Hazard was dragging Chelsea sides who weren't really that good, and he's making them better than they should have been. yes, the big knock on him is the season he just gave up. Decided he doesn't really want to play anymore. He only scored 4 goals and he sulked the whole time. But I think if I was to look back on this list in 20 years' time, I would feel weird that Eden Hazard wasn't on it. He won just as much as anyone else, really, and he was so encapsulating I'd have Hazard. I think next has to be Kyle Walker. At the very worst, Kyle Walker's been the second best fullback in the league for the last 10 years, at the very worst. The longevity he has at the top level is just so much better than some of the others. With an extensive team and individual trophy cabinet to go with it. May not have the highest of heights of everyone on this list, but he's so consistent. And if you're thinking of right backs of all time, Walker's career might be second to only Neville. I think he has to go in. So realistically, the last spot is between Harry Kane, Mohamed Salah and Virgil van Dijk. Ederson and Joe Hart are amazing players, but I think these three are just a level above them in impact. And I think as a goalkeeper, probably it's harder to get in. You'd have to be so dominant over a long span, like a Cech or a Schmeichel who came in late but then was an instant impact. I think these two goalkeepers are good, but they're just not at that level. So the last spot is between Kane, Salah and Van Dijk. And I think in a similar argument to Kyle Walker, I think the last spot has to be Harry Kane's. There's a tendency to think that Virgil van Dijk has been at this level his whole career because he was so quickly impactful at Liverpool. But it's just not true. He was a very promising player at Celtic. A very good player at Southampton. But Virgil van Dijk wasn't this level his whole career. I think people think that because he came in so quickly. He came in and was so good so quickly, you assume he's been doing this everywhere, rather than actually watching the whole time and thinking, that's a promising player. He's only been at this level for 3 years. He joined Liverpool in January 2018 and he basically missed the whole of the 2021 season. And his impact on the team is unmatched, and he's easily the best defender in the world and probably clear of number 2. But I don't think 3 years is enough to put him in yet. Mo Salah has an extra year of this level performance over Van Dijk, as he finished this year and has once again been top class, world class, one of the best players in the year, fighting for the golden boot, dragged the Liverpool team. He just hasn't been good. He has the record for the most goals in a season and has been great for Liverpool, but I think him and Kevin De Bruyne take a knock for their weaker performances at Chelsea. Both of them were at Chelsea, weren't great, left the league, came back. De Bruyne came back 2 years earlier than Salah and has had 2 years of extra level top performance and has more trophies than Salah. I think Mohamed Salah's not far, probably, but at this point I'd have De Bruyne over him and then have Kyle Walker over him. So to round up my list of active players who should make the Premier League Hall of Fame based on their performances in the Premier League is Cristiano Ronaldo, Sergio Aguero, Jamie Vardy, Kevin De Bruyne, N'Golo Kanté, Eden Hazard, Kyle Walker and Harry Kane. That's my 8. If those players were to all retire today, I think those are 8 players who should definitely make induction later on. I really like the idea of the Hall of Fame. I think you have great debates coming up in a few years. Tight spot between 2 top level strikers, which one gets inducted, or players retire and you wonder whether they're going to get inducted first time or second time, third time, because I love the idea. I would make it a bigger deal. I think the Premier League isn't doing enough. Just having it on the internet is great and cool and whatever, but make it a big deal. Make it the end goal for a Premier League player's career is to get in the Hall of Fame. And with that, that's the end of the episode. Thank you very much for listening to episode 3 of the Unsigned Manager Podcast. Please keep sharing, please keep supporting and listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you all next week.